Hi, Marshall. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk to you. Could we start by just hearing a bit about your background, where you come from, whatever you'd like to share?
Sure. It's good to see you. Thanks for having me. I was born and grew up in Northeast Texas, a very rural farming community, and then got my undergrad as I left that area in communications, thinking I was going to be a journalist. I love writing, and I really was 100% convinced that I would be writing for the rest of my life. But it was during my senior year of college that a communications professor of mine was the one who said, I think you want to be a therapist. And based on how I wrote and what I wrote about, and she set up an opportunity for me to go meet with a grad program in marriage and family therapy. And before you know it, that's what happened next. I did not have it on my radar. Where I come from, there's no such thing as therapists. So I had no understanding of that as a career. But while in my marriage and family program, discovered a love for working with families and children and expressive play and arts, and particularly Santray, came out of that program and immediately started working in facilities that all just featured trauma with medical hospital and children's homes and treatment centers. I was a contractor with CPS. And so I just kind of accidentally kept finding myself developing these niche areas of intersections. And so here I am now where it's all come back around, and I do get to write a lot. I still get to see clients. I get to do consultation, and I get to teach and travel. It's this amazingly diverse collection of different jobs within this one career, this one umbrella, that is as exciting as I could have ever dreamed for.
Wow. I did not know that you were a journalism major.
Yeah.
And even as you're sharing, I'm like, oh. And then you went on to investigate family systems and people's inner worlds.
My favorite parts of therapy are still the parts that feel artistic. I love when a client stumbles into a phrase that is accidental, but succinctly captures a season of life that they desperately needed to label, and then getting just to say that back to them. And I go back and I think my love of succinct phrases and listening comes first from journalism before it had the context of therapy. And so it has been funny to watch how the things have all connected over time.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that succinct phrase, tying in so much in the moment, and even what is it that's happening in those moments for people?
Yeah, I think people are desperate for connection, and even people who are more private or insecure from an attachment point of view, and maybe don't believe connection is possible. There's still this underlying wiring in their nervous system that's desperate for feeling known and feeling understood, that might be beyond their comprehension, or maybe even something that they have attached some shame to and protectors to. And one of the things that can get in the way from feeling known or understood is not being able to know yourself. And so when you watch someone stumble into wording, and then you see this moment of it's like part startle and part relief, and even part catharsis, because something finally got named, something finally got labeled. And I think that's them feeling safe enough in a relationship to finally know a part of themselves. And whenever they're connected to that part of self, then someone else has the chance of stepping into it with them. But if I could be trying to pursue knowing in that part of them all day, but if they're not connected to it, they don't have the result of feeling known. It's not the words as much as sometimes the words, or in art, it might be a drawing, or in sand, it might be a figure or a world, that is that moment in time when they see something that is both indirect and somehow more powerfully illustrated of a part of self than any kind of direct description would have ever been. And then I have the honor of getting to join them there. And that's how we start to shift memory networks from being around the nots and the don'ts and the can'ts to the possibilities.
Wow. My mind right now, I'm like, wow, I want to dive into talking specifically about trauma. I want to talk more about writing. I want to talk about sand tray. You've always loved to write. When did sand tray therapy enter the picture?
I was first exposed to it in graduate school in my master's program. So that would have been 20 years ago. And kind of brief exposure, it wasn't deep study, but it was on my radar. And I remember having this interaction with it where I was just surprised by how empowering it felt. But immediately after grad school and moved to Austin, the clinical supervisor I had, Sand Trey, was a big part of her world. And she had been supervised when she was an intern by Dr. Linda Homeyer, who is one of the authors of kind of the main Sand Tray manual. And so I was in the company of these Sand Tray greats from the beginning, before I knew that that's what was happening. I didn't have awareness of that. And so from just day one, it was a part of how I learned to do the work. And I was just lucky enough to be learning from some of our masters.
Could you tell people, for those who don't know, what is sand tray? And for those who are not seeing this and they're listening in, there's a background behind you of a wall full of figures.
Yeah, a wall full of figures and a big literal tray of sand right behind me. So sand tray is an expressive therapy that features a container that holds sand and categories of figurines, sometimes called images, sometimes called miniatures. And the opportunity is for a person to create a scene or a world using any of those figures as either really direct retelling of a story or very abstract symbolic representation of exploration of self, in a way that allows them to have enough distance from that part of self that's trying to be explored that feels safe to the client. And then we gradually over time incorporate knowing and practicing meaning making. It's not about interpretation. It's about learning to make meaning. It's different than some of the other expressive therapies because while they're creating worlds, they're not always creating the actual figure. So it doesn't require someone to feel like they're artistically talented or feel like they have any special subset of skills. I mean, all the expressive arts really allow for a range of ability, but sometimes it can get in the way, especially of adults believing that they can take advantage of an art form because they've already appraised whether or not they think they have talent for it. But sand tray is novel and it doesn't require any artistic ability, just for you to choose what feels right and then to allow that to become representative of whatever is needed to be explored.
I know that art in of itself can be powerful. What is it about creating it yourself that is so powerful, that it's used for healing?
Yeah. Well, I go back to thinking about, the foundation of what makes a person is their mind. and their mind is made up of memory networks. So if you think about the individual components of a memory network, we know we have cognition, we know we have emotion, we know we have meaning-making potential. All of those things are usually pretty engaged in any form of therapy. But a big part of memory network is also sensation and somatic. My dog is meeting her needs known at this very second. But a big part of memory network is what's sensory and what's somatic. And so art making allows, that work that's also cognitive and affective and existential to be there while not ignoring the sensory and somatic components. And so I just think it honors everything that is needed for memory network to have the option of being enlivened and integrated. So it's my bias. It's my favorite.
It's your favorite way to access what's happening inside of us, the memory, work with it.
Yeah. And to not have predetermined thoughts about outcome, that to be able to just engage in process and exploration. And I think that people learn about poetry, they learn about art, they learn about music, that it's about product instead of about process. And, that's not what the expressive arts are about. They honor the process of being engaged in discovery. It's not what you learned necessarily in elementary art class when, you got a grade for how beautiful your ashtray was. We started learning to connect judgment to an ability to expression in ways that were sometimes accidental. Sometimes it was about comparing, like, oh, my friend Eric, he's good at drawing. I'm not. I can look at what he made, I can look at what I made and evaluate the difference. And so we start hindering our ability to just feel free to be in the process. But when you can find freedom in that again, even if, you're playing in the clay and you end up never making anything, like you make a human form and then reset it and start over, you practice being engaged in formation in a sensory way. And I think that's where the power of expressive techniques in therapy really lie.
If we kind of go like global or cultural, what is it, do you think, about our culture, about the world, that connecting with ourselves in these ways is just not talked about or not known?
Yeah. I think every culture and subculture and society has its inherent strengths and blind spots and weaknesses. And, so in the part of the world where I grew up, there are a lot of things connected to art that some of that might be engendered, like it was tied to stereotypical gender roles, and some of it is about it being frivolous, that it's not going to get the garden taken care of. Sometimes prioritization of values and ethics and artistic expression is seen as lesser, instead of understanding that being engaged in art is when work ethic is being really explored and pulled together. All of the different components of something that's needed to make good character decisions are being formed by being freely engaged in exploration. We miss out on all of the individual traits that are honored and held at the same time, and we just focus on outcome. It's just kind of culturally what happens. I was thinking just this morning that it wasn't all that many generations ago that poets were revered as thought leaders, that they were the truth tellers, and they provided the necessary commentary that those in power needed in order to be challenged. They were representatives of people, they were revered, and that just doesn't feel prominently true currently, unless you consider, Twitter poetry, which I don't think I do. We've lost belief that art inherently has value, and not all places, not all cultures, but in many ways, we've lost faith in the power of expression. And if I'm going to be real honest, I think right now we're in a season where a lot of expression is about propaganda instead of discovery. And when you engage yourself in art, you discover something. You can't determine what you're going to learn. You have to be open to the freedom of what it's going to reveal to you. And that's not comfortable for all people.
It's almost like there's an experimentation and a trying out with art of, okay, what's it like to express myself in this way, and what does that feel like, and what if I try out this thing that feels that way? It seems so core to healing, that we would, as we heal, we're trying on and trying out different ways of being. Even though there's such great diversity amongst all of us, what are the things that you'd say are pretty core, that are consistent across the board for being human in our healing journeys?
Yeah, that humans are born full of possibility and potential. And the way that they learn that it's safe to engage that is by having these needs that are unknown to them. They're just, blobs of impulse and desire. And how those things get met and shaped over time starts to determine the expression of who they think they are. That all versions of identity are reflection of your relational environment, because you can't come to know who you are in a vacuum. And so you're always looking into mirrors that other people are holding, and you're deciding that what you see is true without realizing that the person holding the mirror is coloring that point of view. And I think all of that happens, across culture and across geography. I think that all people get wounded because humans inevitably fail one another. And I think there's certain kinds of wounding that are more devastating, and it's not often like the nature of the trauma. It's not saying, oh, this kind of accident is always the most painful. It's often who's involved in the wounding that is, determined. Is it a caregiver, someone I trusted? Is it an institution I was taught to have faith in, and then it failed me? Is it something that I had put all of my hopes into, and then that was taken from me? Like, whenever something that is rooted then in those core identities involved in how that mirror was held up becomes a part of what's hurting us, that produces the most devastating outcomes. And I think all humans have the capacity to heal and rebound, and that resilience is inherent to being human. And you just need a little bit of care and attention and tending in order to get back into the part of you that is full of possibility. So I think we're complicated, and we deserve the right to get to be.
I love that. Resilience is inherent, and it's as if the wounding is to be expected, and the resilience is to be expected as well.
Absolutely. Do you know what goes with that? Is I believe all humans are creative. And some were taught that their version of creativity is inferior, but all humans have the capacity for creativity, and that's one of the things I really want to restore. Like I think if we could raise a generation of people who trust in their own creativity, like global problems would be solved. I think that fences would come down, the connections would be built. Again, bias comes back to just choose an art, have an experiment. If you're someone who has some degree of, privilege of time and a little bit of resource, take a class. Say, I'm going to, for the next year of my life, engage in one art form, and I'm not going to stop just because I went and I feel like I failed at it. I'm going to keep going. And if that's not something you can find an opportunity to do, then get a notebook and just start writing, or, get a pencil and start sketching, sit in your yard for 10 minutes and draw what you see, and just make it a discipline that I'm going to do this for a year. And I'm going to see what I find out about myself when I don't let excuses get in the way of creativity. And I think it would shift something.
I think that's really important. And I want to make sure I'm tracking with this committing to a year to choose an art, and with what we were saying about wounding and resilience. Are you saying that creativity is how we tap into the resilience?
Yeah, I think when you think about when creativity is alive in you, often that means that multiple parts of your nervous system are cooperating. You've got primitive lower brain and higher brain engaged. You have right and left hemisphere engaged. So I think the act of sustained creativity, and we know this from some of our great authors, is inherently integrating at a nervous system level. And so the more integrated we are, the more regulated we are, the more relationally capable we are. And then we find, as a result of that endeavor, more of our inherent resilience.
Wow. I want to continue this conversation, and I know that we're coming to the end of our time. I'd love to have you back on again. Is there anything else that, before we go, that you'd like people to know, that you'd like to share?
Well, yeah, I guess I would like the opportunity to make you a little bit uncomfortable.
Great.
I don't know, what's come ahead of me, or who you're going to have after me, but I want to make sure that people know who you are, and that you have been, even as a newer professional, just someone that provided a spark for me, getting to know you and be a little bit a part of your journey, that your curiosity and your sensitivity and your honesty are already benefiting a lot of people. And I like that I get the chance to say those things, and you just have to sit there and take it.
Well, thank you. I was not expecting that, but I'm grateful for your encouragement and the way that you've allowed me to feel safe to, like we were talking about during this conversation, try out different thoughts, try out different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for doing this, Alex.
Where would you like people to find you, if that's okay?
Yeah, just go to my website, which is my name smushed together. It's got a whole lot of L's in the middle. You just have to keep going. So marshalllyles.com. And you can find my email and social media, and read my blog, and sign up for my distribution list if you want to know about when I'm teaching or when books are coming out or anything like that.
Okay, so marshalllyles.com. That's 3 L's in the middle.
That's 3 L's in the middle. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, Alex.